All right, welcome all. I hope everybody's ready now. All right. So when trying to understand Azure, as I said right yesterday, we discussed that we'll be covering Azure from the basic itself. We'll try to see what actually is Azure, how it works, right? So that is what we are going to cover now. And the very first question, first of all, before we get into Azure, is what is cloud computing? All right. So this is one of the three modules for AZ900. All right. So when you start learning AZ900, right? That is the basic of the Azure, right? AZ900 will have three modules. One is related to the cloud computing. The other one deals with the second part, which is the Azure infrastructure and services. And the third one is basically where we study the governance and management. All right. So these are basically the three modules that we need to cover. In the first module of cloud computing, we'll see very basics of what cloud computing is, what are different models which are available, which are all the different cloud services which are available. In the second module, that is where, we start talking about the Azure infrastructure and various services which are available within the Azure platform itself. All right. So starting with the first one, trying to understand what cloud computing is. So I want everybody to put in their answers as to what they believe is cloud computing. So what you see on your screen is there, but what do you understand with about cloud computing? What do you understand when you hear the term cloud computing? Please put it in the chat window. What is cloud computing? All right. So the definition is very simple. Cloud computing is basically a model. All right. And in this model, this is where you get access to resources on the cloud over the internet, right? And you eventually end up paying for it. So cloud computing is the delivery of services over the internet. All right. So the very basic definition of cloud computing is very simple as well, which says that cloud computing is a model, right, where you get services over the internet. And these services are basically the services that you require. All right. These services, all right, the services are the services that you create on cloud, on Azure, for our example. All right. It's very simple. It's the delivery of various services. Now, these services are of various types. All right. I can say that the service will be a compute service, right? So compute services are basically the services that require, CPU and RAM. Compute stands for any service that requires CPU and RAM to be delivered over the internet is a compute service. For example, when you create your own virtual machine, right? For every virtual machine that you create, there's a certain amount of compute that is required. Yes. So yeah, the compute there. So when you create a resource like VM, when you create a resource, something like an app service, all right? So you're not aware of app services as of now, but app service within Azure is a service that lets you host web applications. All right. You can host web applications on a virtual machine as well. But app service is also a resource that you can use to host web applications. All right. So various services, VM, app service. So these are the resources that require compute. Now, apart from compute, you may also require, networking resources like creation of a virtual network, creation of a VPN, creation of a firewall. So all these are various resources related to the networking section. All right. Creation of a virtual network itself, creation of various other networking resources such as an express route, a VPN, a firewall. All right, these all you can create within the networking resources. Similarly, for storage, you can create storage on
Could
the
you
cloud
repeat
itself.
the networking part?
Uh, can you repeat your question?
Could you repeat the networking part? I was able to understand compute.
Yeah. See, when you're working with networking based resources on the cloud, all right, we call them networking resources. For example, when you create a firewall on the cloud, when you create a virtual network on the cloud, when you create a virtual private network on the cloud, all right, these are all the services which are related to networking. All right, so networking you already understand. You can create that network, virtual network. You will see when we are working with virtual machines, you will see virtual networks also. All right, because for any virtual machine that I create on the cloud, I need to have a virtual network. I need to connect it to a network, right? So whenever you create a virtual machine, you also got to, what, whenever you create a virtual machine, you also have to connect to that virtual machine, right? Now, in order to connect to that virtual machine, it is mandatory for that virtual machine to be a part of a network. All right. So as I said, then you have the storage service. You have various types of storages present on the cloud, right? The most basic one will being, for our example, the Azure storage, right? You can create a data lake as well. Data lake also lets you store data. And then there are various analytics service also present on the Azure that lets you analyze data, right? Various analytical service, right? So whatever you want to do, whatever you do with your personal machine, if you want to do it on the cloud itself, you can do it. All right.
So database comes under storage.
No, database is a different, service itself. Storage is a different service. Database is another service. All right. Now let's try to understand with an example. Let's say that you have a task. Now the task is very simple. You have a machine learning model to train, right? You have a machine learning model and you want to train this machine learning model. Now, ideally, what you'll require is you'll require a personal machine, right? Let's say to perform this task, you need a machine. Let me get rid of this. Well, like, let's say you need a machine which has, let's say, 8 cores of CPU, 64 GB RAM. Let's say the data being used is more than 1 terabyte, so I need 2 TB of storage. Now, when I have such workload in my hands, on my hands, right, there are two options that I can go for very easily. There are only two options that I can go for. One is I can, either have my own machine that I can use. So the situation is that I do not have such a high-end machine. So the description that you see on a screen, I don't have such machine. I have a machine with 4 cores of CPU, 8 GB or 16 GB of RAM, with 512 GB of storage. Let's say. So what am I going to do in that particular case? What do I do? What do you think?
Buy from cloud.
Yes, buying from cloud. All right, we'll try to understand if that is, correct or not. First option is you buy it from the cloud. What about others? What do you think?
Rent it from cloud.
Ramp up the personal machine, buy it accordingly. But um,
Already, you want to
earlier,
ramp up
before
the
cloud,
existing
that
machine.
was the
All right, yes, yes. So one option is that you modify the existing machine, right? Second is you go and buy another machine. All right. So the second option is very simple. You go ahead and you buy another machine, and then you have third option for cloud computing. All right. So which is more beneficial? Now let's try to understand. If you want to modify your own machine, that requires vertical scaling. All right. Just a second. All right. So when I want to work with my own machine, that requires vertical scaling. Vertical scaling means that you are trying to scale an existing resource. All right. You're not going to add another instance of the resource, but what you're going to do, you're going to increase the capacity of the existing resource. So that is known as vertical scaling. So that is your first option. All right. That you go ahead and you try to increase the capacity of the existing machines themselves. All right. Another option would be to go to the market. Yes. Buy an appropriate machine, get it home, right? You pay in full for the machine that you have. But if you do not want to put in a lot of money, right? Because if you follow any one of those two steps, either by doing vertical scaling, by increasing the capacity of the existing resource, right? Buying more compute and all, you end up paying. You end up paying a lot. The cost for the hardware, then the various other costs available. But then obviously the hardware cost would be the most significant cost here, right? The third option is to get it from cloud computing or to get it from a cloud service provider. All right. So this term CSP you will hear a lot. This means a cloud service provider. All right. So you can get it from a cloud service provider also, where you can get the exact machine that you want. You can get the exact machine that you want using cloud computing without having any human interaction. I don't have to talk to any human, right? Unlike buying the hardware itself, that is not something that I have to do here. I don't have to talk to anybody. I don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to put in a lot of money, right? Because there's no capital investment happening here. So I don't have to put a lot of money here. What I do, I get all of this and it is all on rent. When you talk about cloud computing, this term rent over here becomes very important. All right. Because you have to signify, all right, or you have to specify, right? And you have to understand that whatever you do on cloud computing is always going to be on rent. It is never permanent. Anything that you do on cloud computing is never permanent. You pay for it. Yes, you do pay for it, but it's the rent that you're paying. All right. Sometimes the rent would be for the duration that you have used the resource, and sometimes it would be the duration that you have created the resource for. All right. So cloud computing in very simple language, right, is a model where these resources are made available over the internet. That is cloud computing. Understood? Yes? Any questions? All right. Very simple. Yes, you will rent this particular compute. You pay for, let's say, if you used it for 5 hours, you pay only for 5 hours. That is cloud computing. If you used it for 2 hours, you only end up paying for 2 hours. If it's only for 1 hour, you end up paying only for 1 hour. So that is the cost, or that is the amount that you have to pay based on the utilization that you have. All right. So I can create a similar machine on the cloud, right? I can end up, paying on an hourly basis for this machine that I've created. The other person can connect to it. They can work on this machine, right? And then let's say if after 10 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours, I'm done with the work, right? So I don't have to then use this compute. I can let it go. You can always let go of the compute resources or any resource that you create on the cloud. Clear? Is this clear to everyone? Shall we move ahead?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So the next thing that we are going to try and understand within cloud is the concept of various cloud services. What is public cloud? What is private cloud? What is hybrid cloud? So before cloud computing became popular, all right, before cloud computing became popular, how did organization work for all these resources that they wanted? Where did organization get all these resources from? Anyone?
They had or they have on-premise
All
infrastructure,
right,
which is also called private cloud.
correct. Others? What did organizations do back in the day in order to get all these resources, right? So back in the day, various organizations, they had to create their own data centers, right? Within their campus, within their office, they would create a data center. All right. So they will build a data center, they will create a data center, they will have a lot of servers there, they will have a lot of storage there, they will, add networking there, right? Failover mechanism, everything. So you were building the entire data center on your own, the organization, right? For their use itself, they were building an entire data center within their office, right? So eventually you have to end up paying for the hardware, right? So hardware cost you have to bear, the maintenance cost also you have to bear, because if you have servers, if you have storage, that you've built within a data center, then you need people to manage the data center also. You need administrators who can take care of the data center. And that is what is called as a private cloud, also known as the on-premises environment. All right. It's also called as on-premises. It means that the organization has created its own data center. I am not putting anything in any CSP's data center, cloud service providers data center, whether it's AWS or GCP or Google, or sorry, Azure. I'm not going to put anything in their data centers. It will all be within your data center. All right, the data center that you create. So organizations back in the day, they used to create these data centers within their campuses, right? They used to place servers within that data center. They used to place storage within that data center. They used to create networking. They used to create databases within that center, right? And all of it was done by the organization itself, right? The organization itself was responsible for building and maintaining these resources. All right. So this was called as a private cloud. This is basically the traditional method of how data centers were created. All right. Then something happened, right? And what happened was that around 2010, something changed. What happened? Let's say, for example, Microsoft, let's say, came to Bangalore and they wanted to create their data center in Bangalore. Let's say they created a data center like this within Bangalore. Now, Microsoft was very excited to come to the region and build its data center. But what it did not realize is that when you're creating a data center, it takes a lot of investment. All right. Creation of a data center is not easy. I'll show you it, with the calculators as well as to how much you're going to spend to create a data center on the cloud itself. Right. So it's a very expensive process. All right. So everybody cannot afford to create a data center since it's a very expensive process. So what did organizations do? right? Let's say Microsoft here in our case. When Microsoft came to India, let's say in Bangalore, they created a data center. Now their expectations were very high. With this data center, their expectations was very high. Let's say, they initially thought that the utilization for this data center would be 100% or 80% or 90% soon. But that did not happen. What they noticed was, let's say, only 30% of the data center was utilized by Microsoft themselves. So the data centers that they had created, only 30% of that data center was available to Azure, all right, for Microsoft to work with. But
Is
this
this really
remaining,
happened?
no, eventually this is how it all came into effect, all right. But this is not the actual story. I'm just giving you an example. But this is exactly what had happened initially, all right. So they realized that this 70% of the space on their data center that they've created, the on-premises data center that they had created, is not utilized. All right. So let me give you a similar example. Let's say you created a house or you built a house. The house has, let's say, ground floor, first floor, second floor, and third floor. And you have a very small family of, let's say, three members. All right. So you have a family of three members that is, sufficient. The space on the ground floor is sufficient for them, right? But then when you were building your home, you built it for three stories. The first, second, third stories got added. Ground, first, second, third. But you're also saying that your family is, fully fit, or it can sufficiently stay on the ground floor itself, right? So what do you do with the remaining floors? What do you do? Because when you had built it, there was a lot of investment that went into it. There's a lot of cost associated with these resources, right? So what do you do to get your returns? What do people do when they have a house with various different stories that they have, and they've put in a lot of investment into buying them? What do people do eventually?
Rent it out.
They
Rent
rent
it.
it.
Yes, absolutely. You rent out the remaining space, right? That you are not going to require. Why? Because it gives you a return on the investment that you've made. All right. So you put it on rent. And this is exactly what the organizations did with this 70% of remaining space. They rented it out. So smaller companies, they could reach out to Microsoft, not directly. You do not reach them directly. You reach them through a portal, which in our case is the Azure portal. So you can open Azure portal. You can select the region, right? Let's say this was in Bangalore. So Bangalore region would have a different name for it. Similarly, Mumbai will be a different region, right? Delhi will be a different region. Chennai will be a different region. So like this, different regions are decided. All right. And that is exactly what Microsoft did. They started, all right, they started renting out this space to the general public. Now you could access these portals, and through these portals, you can create resources on the cloud. All right, you can create the similar resources on the cloud without any problem. All right, but if you remember, right, unlike the private cloud, we don't pay for everything here. We don't pay for the creation of the data center itself. We only pay the rent, and that too for the services that I have used. I will only pay the cost for the resources that I have used. I do not pay for anything that I have not created, right? So you have a month, minute based bills, you have hourly bills over here, hourly rents over here, right? That you're going to pay for the resources that you're going to create. So everybody understands the concept of the public cloud. This is generally available for the public to create their resources. It can again be a compute resource or a database or a storage resource or a networking resource or any other resource that you want to create on the Azure platform, right? So this is your private cloud. We also call it as a private cloud, right? So if you want to go to, let's say, a particular location that uses, the Microsoft authentication, right? You can get that permission. Now, this is there, the place, where or the situation where you're not creating your own data center, but eventually using a Microsoft provided or AWS provided or GCP provided, data centers. So that is called as a public cloud,
தூக்கம் வரலையா?
where guys, can you all mute yourselves?
எனக்கு ஃபுல்லா வெட்டா இருக்கு.
Let me find this. I think it's muted now. Fine. So this is called as a private cloud, where you build everything. Oh, sorry, this is called as a public cloud, where apart from, or instead of building everything on your own, you rent out these services from the cloud service provider. All right. So now the organizations don't have to create a dedicated data centers, right? They could go ahead and they could work on the cloud itself. They can sanction those resources. As I said, right, the first example that we discussed, where you had a machine learning task, you needed a machine, there was a specific, specification for that machine, there was a specific storage that you required. All right. So that became your public cloud. Now we have another type of cloud that is called as a hybrid cloud. All right. So let me open that. So we also have the hybrid cloud. Now, hybrid cloud is for those organizations that they had already created their own data center. So if you remember organizations like Wipro, TCS, Infosys, they would have created their own data centers, right? They will definitely have their private cloud. Every organization, all the big organizations, they will always have their private cloud. But then in certain scenarios, they would also extend their presence on the public cloud. Let's say Infosys, for example, Infosys will have its own data center, but for some work, they may require Azure, they may require AWS, they may require GCP, right? So hybrid cloud is dedicatedly for those, let's say, organizations who first of all already have private cloud. All right. So having private cloud is like a prerequisite. So if you already have a, you know, private cloud and you're also taking advantage of the public cloud, you're also going to Azure to create, let's say, some resources, then you end up using the hybrid cloud. Now, my question is going to be very simple to all of you, that you understood the concept of the three clouds? Yes or no? Or tell me, which cloud do you think is most secure, security wise?
Private cloud.
Private,
Hybrid.
Private is more secure.
No, private is more
private
Al-
secure.
cloud.
So private cloud is more secure because it is present within the organizational boundaries. In many scenarios, organizational will not have, the public endpoint to these data centers. Also, public endpoint means that anything hosted on these data centers or anything put on these data centers will not be available over the internet. Also, you have to come to the organization in order to access it. So that is there. So the most
So,
secure cloud is the private cloud,
but
and the reason is very simple. Ideally, within private cloud,
security
yeah,
depends on the expertise as well, right?
yes, 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 definitely. Security will defend. primarily on how you're going to configure the resources. All right. How you're going to configure the security standards. That is going to be there. But in general, anything which is available on the internet is not considered to be safe. Do you agree with that at least? Anything that is, easily available on the internet is not considered to be safe. And that is why if I create a virtual machine, if I create a very simple virtual machine, and if this virtual machine is available over the internet, right? And I don't know how many of you have had an experience of working with virtual machines, but this is not what is, you know, I would say implemented. All right. You would rarely see in a production environment, you would rarely see a virtual machine with a public endpoint. That means with a public IP. All right. So it needs to have a public IP as a public endpoint for people to connect to it over the internet. But what you will see is generally we do not require this. We don't want this. And to safeguard our environment, we say that we are not going to have the connectivity to the internet, because anything available on the internet, anything accessible over the internet is generally considered to be unsafe. All right. Now, second question is, which one do you think is most expensive? And before you answer that question, there are two things that I want to discuss with you. All right. So one is Capex. The other one is Opex. Have you heard of Capex and Opex? Anyone? How many of you have heard of it? Capex and Opex. How many of you have heard of it?
Capital expense, operational expense,
Absolutely correct.
investment and maintenance.
So capital expense and or capital expenditure or operational expenditure. That is what Capex and Opex mean. Now, Capex is generally a one-time cost. All right. So when you are building a data center, let's say you are building a data center. So what do you think is a one-time cost? What can you think of
Buying
as
the
a one-time
infrastructure.
cost? What?
Buying the infrastructure.
Absolutely correct. Not the infrastructure, but buying the hardware, right? So within your data center, you would require a lot of hardware. So buying the hardware is a capital expenditure, one-time cost. Once you bought the hardware, you don't have to buy it every month, every week, right? So you don't have to, keep on buying the infrastructure or the hardwares over here. What else? Let's say you want to build a data center. So you need a building. Yes or no? You need a dedicated building or a specific space within the building to create this data center, right? So that is also going to be a one-time cost. You're not going to build or construct that building again and again and again, right? Once you're done with it, you're good to go, right? So that is the basic definition of capital expenditure. The money that you spend initially, all right? So the initial expense, all right, and the one-time investment that you do, all right, investment that you're not going to repeat again and again and again, but basically it's a one-time investment. You bought, let's very expensive something, right? You spend money on something which is very expensive and you're not going to buy it again and again. That is your capital expenditure. On the other hand, you also have operational expenses, all right, or the operational expenditure. This is a recurring expense. So can you tell me any recurring expense with respect to a data center that you've built? Any recurring expense that you can think of?
Maintenance,
Absolutely correct. Maintenance.
cost for
What
the
else?
resource that is maintaining the hardware,
Up-
software.
Upgrading,
All right.
If
So the
there
salary
is any
to
answer,
rent,
employees.
yes, yes,
Electricity
yes,
bill,
absolutely correct. Right. So any expense that is recurring in the nature is your operational expenditure. Any cost that is, used to keep your data center operational or make it work. All right. These are not one-time costs. These are recurring costs. These are costs that you have to, let's say, pay every week, every month, or anything it could be. Right. So if this data center is built on a rented building, then the rent for the building becomes your operational expenditure because you end up paying the rent every month, right? For an organization, you need administrators to manage the data center. You need Azure administrators or various other administrators to efficiently manage the data center. So their salary is also a monthly expense for you. All right. It's not a one-time cost. You're not going to get rid with the salary part with a one-time investment. It's a recurring investment. It's a recurring payment that you have to do. Clear? Now you understand the difference between Capex and Opex. One is the capital expenditure, the initial investment, the one-time investment that you do. Then operational expenditure is basically the cost that you're going to spend to keep the data center operational, to keep the data center up and running. All right. Now you tell me the three models that you've seen, public, private, and hybrid. Which one is the most expensive model?
private.
And I leave that to all of you. Please think,
hybrid.
hybrid. Please think and answer. Everyone, everybody has to answer this.
Private is more expensive because of you are taking separate, right? That's why it is so expensive.
All right. Others, what do you think?
Capex is more for private cloud.
Hybrid. Hybrid is more expensive.
Hybrid is more expensive. Absolutely correct. Hybrid cloud is the most expensive cloud. Now, why is that? Right? So if you are confused, you can take a look at it as well. All right. So when you talk about cloud, there are generally three types of cost. When you talk about public and private, right? There are generally two types of cost. One is the capex and the others are the opex. Yes. So when you create a private cloud, right? There is going to be a capex. There is going to be an opex also, right? These two are going to be there. When you create a public cloud, right? When you use public cloud, there is no capex that you have to pay. Microsoft will not ask you for a capital expenditure here. Microsoft is not going to tell you that, listen, we need to build this data center, and to create this data center, I need this much money from you. No, not going to happen. Whatever you're going to use, you just pay us for that. So that is the public cloud. It does not have any capital expenditure. Does it have a operational expenditure?
Yes,
What is
and
the
it's going
operational
to be,
expenditure with the public cloud?
it will be more than the operational cost of private cloud.
No, no. My question is very simple. What is the operational expenditure of a public cloud?
That rent we
Getting
are using or
Rent.
utilizing this service.
It depends upon, yes, correct, utilization.
right. So for public cloud, when you use Azure, will Microsoft come to you and say that you have to pay for the salaries of the employees? No, right? or the electricity cost you have to pay. No. So what we can do is we can also add another extension to the different costs which are there. One is the capital expenditure, one is the operational expenditure, and the third one is the rent that you end up paying, right? So in public cloud, I don't have capex, I don't have operational expenditure such as Wi-Fi, internet, electricity, salaries. All of them are not there, right? So I'm putting a cross here in the operational expenditure. But do I have the rent to pay? Yes, I have the rent to pay. The hourly rent for whatever resources I'm creating, I have to pay for their rents as well. So rent is fine. When you come to the hybrid cloud, by definition, what is hybrid cloud? It's nothing but the sum of public and private, right? So when you have the sum of public and private, will you have capex? Yes, because there's a private cloud installed. Will you have the Opex? Yes, because there's a private cloud installed, right? I have to pay the salaries, I have to pay the electricity bills, I have to pay the water bills, everything. And then do I have the rent here? I also have to pay for the rent because in hybrid cloud model, I will have private and public both. The operational expenditure and the capital expenditure will come from the private cloud, right? And the rent comes from the public cloud. So now you tell me which one looks the most expensive to you?
Hybrid.
Hybrid, right?
But why companies are preferring hybrid?
Because organizations don't want to continue, investing into their building their own data centers. It's very expensive. I'll show you with a calculator that building your own data center does not make sense in the current world. All right. You should ideally use the cloud-based services only. They are very cheap. They offer more features. They are more reliable. They have a higher availability.
Usually, let's say they have their private cloud, which is on-premise data centers. What is the maximum life tenure for those data centers? 30 years, 60 years?
It's not fixed, right? Generally, they'll have a considerable amount of lifetime, but it's not fixed, right? 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. If you want data centers to run continuously, you can make them run for 50 years also. All right. There is no hard and fast, definition of how long will a
So
data
they
center
cannot
work.
demolish or decommission that existing data centers if they prefer to move to public completely.
Why would they? If they've put in a lot of money into building those data centers, will they just demolish all of that money that they've spent? No, right? It's more like, let's say you had an old house, you created a new one. So does that mean that you're going to demolish the previous one? No, you'll keep that as well. All
Okay.
right. So they continue to use the data centers because they put in a lot of money right into building those data centers. So they cannot just let it go. All right. So they continue to use the private cloud. They continue to use their own data centers. But now they want to extend their services on the public cloud because it's much cheaper. Public cloud is very cheap. All right.
Which
And we'll
environment
give,
is security point of view is great. Public is
yeah,
not as security, right? Secure.
yes, for security standpoint, as I said,
That's the
private cloud is,
main important too, right?
yes, it's important. It's very important. But then public cloud can also be configured, all right,
Yeah.
to be secure.
hmm But most of the bank actually, even in any country, right? They want to keep
They'll
their
use private
data
cloud.
is very secure, right? That's the reason
Yes,
they are
yes, yes.
going for hybrid, right?
Any, see, that is the continuous usage that are there for the private cloud. As of now, these critical organizations who deal with critical data, they would generally have private cloud, banking solutions, uh, critical organizations, for example, in India, DRDO, ISRO, all these organizations, they would have their own cloud, or they would have their public cloud, they will have their own data centers, right? It's not that public cloud is unsafe, but private cloud is thought to be more safe. Why? Because of various reasons. First of all, the biggest reason, that it's not available on the internet. Correct?
Correct. Yeah.
To access the private cloud, the employees of that organization have to come to the office, connect to the office network, and then they would be able to access this private cloud, right? If they cannot come to the office, then they have to connect to it through the VPN, right? And it is considered to be more safe because it's not available on the internet. So anything which is not available on the internet is, by default considered to be safe.
So they choose to store certain type of sensitive data in private and like how they
Yes, yes, yes.
categorize and come up with the decision.
See, that all
Way
depends
to
on
go
what the
public, way to
requirement is.
go private.
That all depends on what the requirement is. What data are you willing to let go onto an internet-based service? Or what data you don't want to, let it go to the internet-based services? It's not that the moment that they send the data to Azure, it's going to get leaked. No, that is not going to happen. Azure employs a lot of different, services to make sure or to ensure that their environment is safe to use for everybody. But then it's a psychology that in general, private cloud is more secure. All right. I can create a data center, I can create, public cloud with more safety than what you have in the private cloud. But then in general, also, it is considered to be more safe. Is that clear
Yeah,
to everyone?
and usually these decisions are not with the data engineers, but who will be taking all these decisions, like when to
The
go
solutions
for
architect.
solutions architect? How about data
Yes,
architect?
data architect will generally define how the data is stored, right? But here we are not talking about just data. We are talking about an entire data center.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay, solution architect and any other roles they have the say in these decisions?
Yes. See, everybody will have a say. A security engineer will have its own say. A network engineer will have their own say. A
Mhm.
normal, cloud engineer will have their say. But then eventually, it is generally the data, sorry, not the data, the cloud architects who are going to define the architecture of the cloud environment. All right.
Okay.
Is that clear to everyone? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you understood clearly the difference between private and public cloud and the cost associated with them.
Yes.
Yes. So let's try to understand some basic benefits also of cloud computing. All right. And the biggest benefit that we are going to see throughout the course also we'll see is the benefit of availability. Sorry. So what does availability mean in terms of cloud? All right, let's try to understand it with an example. So let's say you have a bank application, right? And the users are trying to access this environment, the application, right? Now, there could be two scenarios here. that the banking application is 24/7 available to the customers, right? But there could also be a scenario where the application is down. Some server error happened, some network error happened, and your application is down. So in which case will we have more availability? We'll have higher availability here, right? So back in the day, if you used to go to SBI, what was the generic response? What was the generic response that you used to get? That the servers are down, right? When the servers are down, we say that my application is not available. All right. And we generally associate it with something called as low availability. All right. Low availability means that you can not rely on these resources. All right. And that is one of the biggest benefit that Azure offers. That is high availability. All right. So Azure employs various methods. All right. Various techniques using which you will basically end up, having very high availability. Various methods it deploys, and we're going to see them in the coming section. We're going to see what all these different methods are, right? But what Azure does, it generally creates copies of your resource. All right. For a storage account, for any storage, has it ever happened to anybody that you stored something on Google Drive and then Google comes back to you saying that, sorry, we cannot show you your data, we cannot give you your data because the data center that it was kept on, or let's say data center, within the data center, the storage device on which it was kept has got damaged and we cannot find your data. Has it ever happened to anybody?
No, never.
No, right?
No.
Yeah. One second. Just a minute, guys. Let me have a glass of water. All right. I'm really sorry. Yeah. So discussing about the availability, right? So generally, if the applications are not available, if the resources are not available readily, we say they have very low availability. But if they're 24/7 available, we say that these applications are highly available. They have a very high availability. All right. And as I said, Azure deploys a lot of various architectural, components within Azure, right? The way the architecture is created that makes sure that, there is high availability ensured all the time. So when I say that the Google does not come back to you saying that, you had kept your data and we had kept it on a storage device which has gotten damaged, right? That will never happen because anything that you store on the cloud, there are copies created. It is never ever a situation, right? There will never ever be a situation where only one copy is created. You will have multiple copies, right? And what do multiple copies do? The more copies that you have, the safer your data becomes, right? Against losses, of data. You're not going to lose your data. Correct? Is that clear? So creating copies of data is one of the methods. So anything that you store on Azure, you have to define how the copies are going to get created. All right. Whether you're going to create multiple copies within that same data center or you're going to create multiple copies across various different data centers, that depends on you. But then to ensure high availability, multiple copies are created. All right. And that is true for most of the resources, right? So high availability is one of the biggest benefit that you get from a cloud, all right, or that you get from the cloud computing in general. Clear? All right. So high availability we've done. The second one is fault tolerance. All right. What does fault tolerance mean? Fault tolerance basically means that your cloud environment is ready to deal with any type of fault. Any type of fault. All right. So let's say you have a data center. So the different types of faults that it can have, right? It could have an electricity fault. There could be an internet fault, right? So to deal with various types of faults, Azure has again employed several, things that are going to help you with these faults, all right, and help you with fault tolerance to, work in situations. If there's a fault, right, you still continue to work, right? So how does fault happen? Various types of fault that we discussed. Let's say internet-based fault, internet connectivity has gone. Power-based fault, power connectivity has gone. So to help in these situations, what Microsoft will do or what you will do is, right, you will have multiple power backups, right? So you're giving power from a particular backup. If that fails, you have another power backup. If both of them fail, you have third backup, right? Similarly, with internet also, if you have, let's say, one internet service provider and it has gone down, right? There could be a situation that it has gone down for some reason and which is very specific to that internet service provider. The others may still work, right? So if it's an internet based fault, then again, you can get help very easily, right? So there are different faults, and to deal with different types of faults, Azure employs various methods to tolerate those faults, right? For example, a data center has multiple power backups. An Azure data center will always have multiple power backups. It will have multiple internet service providers connections enabled. All right. So that even if one of, let's say, the internet service provider has gone down, then you'll still have the others working absolutely fine. All right.
Sir, any two solutions for high availability?
The creation of availability zone, the creation of availability set, right? And that is something that we'll see in the topic of virtual machine, right? To increase the availability, what you do, to deal with fault, what you do. So to increase the availability, right, you create something called, let's say, when you're working with a virtual machine, you create availability set, availability zone, virtual machine scale set. All these are different things that you can do to increase the availability of your resources. All right. Then you have scalability. Scalability basically refers to the manual increase in the capacity. All right. When I say manual, what I'm trying to say is if you compare it to elasticity, which is written, right next to it, elasticity is, where you will have automatic provisioning of resources, all right, based on your requirement. But scalability, it refers to manual scalability in this case. And there are two types of scalability. One is vertical scaling. Just a second. And the second one is horizontal scaling. So what is the difference between vertical scaling and horizontal scaling? Who will tell me? What is the difference between them? Vertical scaling and horizontal scaling?
Vertical
Vertical scaling
scaling.
means
You need to
Okay.
expand your existing server or system. Horizontally,
Absolutely correct. Let's say you have a virtual machine here. This is 8 cores, 16 GB RAM, 1 TB SSD, right? If I do vertical scaling, what I'll eventually end up doing is I will increase the capacity from 8 cores to 16 cores, right? So now I'll have a bigger machine. Let's say 16 cores of CPU, 64 GB RAM, and 2 TB SSD. This is called as a vertical scaling, where you scale the existing resource itself. All right. Horizontal scaling would mean where you add the number of instances, you increase the number of instances. You're not worried about the capacity of a single instance. You increase the number of instances itself. That is the horizontal scaling. For example, I had one machine, and to increase the processing, I went from one machine to, let's say, 3 machines. This is called as a horizontal scaling. So basically, I'm creating more resources here. Vertical scaling means that you are modifying the existing resource. All right. Is that clear? All right. So then we have elasticity, and elasticity and scalability, they go hand in hand. All right. You'll find them both to be similar, but the only difference is within, you know, scalability, you talk more about the manual part of it. All right. How you going to manually scale anything. Elasticity refers to automatic scaling. All right. Elasticity generally refers to automatic scaling. All right. That based on certain rules, based on certain conditions, you are adding resources, and based on, again, certain conditions, you are removing resources. That is elasticity. And all of this happens automatically, right? Then you have global reach. In very simple terms, what global reach says is that Azure is available across the globe. You've also seen Azure is present in America, North America, South America, right? Asia, Asia Pacific, India, Middle East, everywhere. Azure is present. Azure has a global reach. Why is that important? Why is the global reach important in Azure? Who will tell me?
Marketing.
is depending on the disaster happening, we need to communicate with that.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. In case of disasters and all, right? It helps, obviously. Other reasons that you can think of,
If we are opening a new office in some other zone or a country, so
that
we
is
have
also
access
fine.
to our
Yes,
data.
yes, absolutely.
If the office is
Apart from that,
nearby to the data center, the
all
internet
right.
connectivity will
So
take off.
let's say I'll give you a situation. You're in India. Now, what would compel you to use a data center within India itself? No, that is fine, right? But my question is very simple. Global reach says that Azure is present across the globe. Now, my question is very simple. What various factors or situations can you think of where this becomes really important?
Cost effective.
Cost effectiveness. Why would you need a data center to be, close to you? Why can I not just rely on data centers from United States?
Faster reliability.
Availability, right? More reachable.
No, you can access anywhere through internet.
See, that will be applicable to a resource that I create in US also. It's not going to go down.
Any security
But
threat happen in any data center?
could be, absolutely could be. But think of the main reason. If I have my resources in US, will I face or will I, deal with a lot of latency here? Yes,
I have
there's a
been
lot of,
telling faster availability of, faster retrieval of data.
yes, absolutely correct. Faster retrieval of data, low latency. Yes, you can also call it low latency. You can access your data quickly. And the second is local regulations. There are government regulation and compliances that force you, right, to use the data center within the region that you are present. So if I'm present, let's say in India, then I need to work with a data center in India itself. There are several policies by the government stating that. For example, recently the government, few years ago, the government came out with a policy saying that any data of Indian citizen, all right, any crucial data related to the Indian citizens should stay within Indian boundary. It should not leave the Indian boundary. The data, all right. It could not be that you're collecting sensitive information here and then storing it somewhere, let's say in US or Australia or some other country, right? So the government of India, through the new IT regulations, made it very clear, right? One second. Yeah. So if the government of India imposes such regulations that you have to store all the data within India data centers only, right? So in that case, I need first of all an Azure data center in India to achieve this task, right? And that is all that global reach means. That is available globally. All right. Then security is there, agility is there. Agility basically refers to, being able to perform multiple tasks, right? All together. So agility is also there. Disaster recovery mechanisms are also there in case of any disaster if the data center has gone down, right?
Sorry,
There,
could you repeat the security agility?
see, security is, you know, is by default there on the cloud. You will have a lot of security measures in place, right? Defender, Microsoft Defender for cloud, uh, Azure recommendations will give you a lot of recommendations related to security. Let's say, telling you that your virtual machine is accessible, you know, over the internet, which is not good for security, right? Anything accessible over the internet is generally not considered to be secure, right? So such messages you can get, all right, within Azure. Agility basically refers to the ability to do multiple things at once. So you can do development also, you can do deployment also, you can do testing also, everything you can do simultaneously on the cloud. So that is the agility that it offers you. And then in case of a disaster, right, it offers you disaster recovery options that can help you retrieve your resources and your data very quickly. All right. Is that clear to all of you? Any doubts here? Any doubts that you face here? No? All right. So what we'll do, we'll take a 5 minute break. All right. I'll just take a 5 minute break. I've been speaking for I think almost 1.5 hours now. So we'll quickly take a 5 minute break for everybody so you can get, a water break, a tea break, or a coffee break. I'm not sure if a tea or a coffee would be available to you in such a short time, but we'll just take this break, right? And I'll put on the timer on the screen and then we'll continue after the break ends. Let me just put the timer on the screen. So it's a 5 minute break, guys. I expect to see everybody break now. Yes, all of you are back from the break now.
Yes, Tesh.
Yes.
All All right, then, guys, moving on. The next thing that we want to understand are the different cloud service models which exist. All right. So, when you talk about the various cloud service models, now service models are different, cloud models are different. All right. Service models are different cloud services which are available, right? So, you would have heard of something called as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, right? So, what is the core difference between them when it comes to cloud computing? All right, let's try to understand that. Now, the moment you start talking about cloud computing, certain things you have to keep in mind, right? Such as the hardware. Let me write it clearly. Who will take care of the hardware in cloud computing? Who takes care of the hardware? In public cloud, who is responsible for the hardware?
Cloud provider.
The cloud provider itself, right? The cloud service provider, the CSP. The CSP will deal with the hardware. If the data center or the cloud is built by Azure, then Microsoft will take care of it. If it's AWS, Amazon will take care of it. If it's GCP, Google will take care of it, right? So the hardware will always be taken care of by the cloud service provider itself. The data center also will be managed by the cloud service provider. Everything within the data center will be managed by the cloud service provider themselves, right? So the moment we start talking about public cloud, one thing is very clear: hardware is taken care of by the cloud service provider itself, right? So what all different things that you have on top of the hardware, right? Let's say you have the hardware sorted, you have the data center sorted, you have various other networking and everything sorted. So what do you build on top of this? You have the operating system on top of the hardware. You will have applications here that you can install and uninstall. You'll have a development environment where you'll write your code, right? And you'll have your data to deal with, right? So these are the four major things that you have to work with in the cloud computing scenario. The operating system, you have to manage the operating system. You have to manage the applications that you install on that operating system, right? On that machine. You are responsible to write the code, right? If you're developing a new application, you are responsible to write the code and then also deal with the data that the code generates or the data in general, right? So the moment it comes to infrastructure as a service, all right, let me put that slide. So it all comes down to, deciding between what you are going to manage and what Microsoft is going to manage. All right. What are you going to manage and what is the cloud service provider going to manage? So as you can see, server, storage, and the hardware in general will be managed by the cloud service providers. So these are all managed by the cloud service providers within infrastructure as a service. If you're talking about infrastructure as a service, we're talking about the hardware being managed by Microsoft, networking, firewall, security features getting managed by Microsoft, and the data center building also Microsoft has to create. Right? So these are all that Microsoft deals with. So what do you deal with? As a user, what do you deal with? So in infrastructure as service, please remember this. The most beautiful example of infrastructure as a service is a virtual machine. All right. A virtual machine is the best example of infrastructure as service. If you get any question around it, just think of a virtual machine. Can you do it with a virtual machine? If yes, then that is your answer. Do I deal with the operating system within a virtual machine? Obviously, I define which operating system I need, whether it's a Linux based operating system, whether it's a Windows based operating system, which version of it I'm going to take, all of that is decided by me itself, right? So infrastructure as a service is the solution where the cloud service provider will only take care of the underlying hardware, the networking, and the data center. On top of that, the operating system that you run, that you will have to manage, the applications that you install, that you are going to manage, the code that you write, right? If you have a development environment there, whatever applications you are developing, the code that you write for that application, all right, that will be managed by the user, and the data will be managed by the user. So that is
Can
infrastructure as a
you
service.
tell me the difference between server and storage mentioned as hardware and data center?
All right, servers give you compute. Servers generally give you the CPU cores and the RAM and all those things. All right, storage devices are generally kept as separate. All right, similarly, there would be other hardware also. You would, let's say in a data center, you have various other hardware. You will have a cooling system in place. All right, you'll have all the wirings and everything. Everything you'll have, all the hardwares.
So
All
the
right,
server, storage, net, wires, everything together called as data center.
yes, within the data center, when you build a data center, you require a lot of component. All right, building the data center requires a lot of components, servers, storage devices, cooling systems, wires, a lot of things. All right, and all of that will be managed by Microsoft itself, because Microsoft will build the data center for you, right? I'm not allowed, you will never be allowed to visit a data center. Please keep that in mind. If you're using AWS, if you're using GCP, or you're using Azure, they will never allow you to go inside a data center and look at the racks and the servers and everything. You'll never do that. All right. It will always be a scenario where everything is accessible over the internet. All right. But again, you'll not be able to see the hardware view. That is not for you. Starting operating system onwards, you get to manage everything. As I said, right? In infrastructure as a service, you get maximum control. The amount of control that you get with the resource in a infrastructure as a service is not something that you get with all the resources, all the other resources. You get maximum control. You get to decide which operating system you want. All right. You get to decide what all applications I want to install on the machine that I have. Everything. If you're developing the code, also you write in that machine, and your data that will be generated will also be written onto that machine itself. All right. Now,
On
what
this
people
slide, it
complained.
is mentioned. On the slide, it is mentioned operating system also. We can take as the infrastructure as a service.
See, operating system, obviously, the cloud service provider will provide you with that, right? You're not going to give your own operating system, but then you get to manage it. The cloud service provider will not manage the operating system for you. All right, and I'll just show it to you. Then people complain that I'm a Python developer, right? Let's say you're a Python developer or a Java developer or anything, right? You're just a developer. So what do you need out of these four components? What do you essentially need? Do I need the ability to install and uninstall whatever application I want? Not really. Do I need the ability to manage the operating system? Again, not really. Do I want to write the code? Yes. Do I want to manage the data that my code is generating? Absolutely yes. Right? So that is what people complain. And then we had platform as a service. Now, along with the servers, the networking, the data centers, operating system is also now managed by Azure itself, and the development tools and all those things, database and everything, right, is managed by Azure. They will create an environment for us and they'll give it to us. And here in platform as a service offering, the users will only have two tasks, right? Out of these four, the ability to install and uninstall whatever I want, the ability to manage the operating system is now gone. Now I can only develop or create my applications using platform as a service offering, or I can end up, storing the data as well. But nothing more than that. I do not get to manage the operating system here. All right. So it will give you an environment to build, to test, to deploy your applications without, focusing on the underlying infrastructure or the operating system or anything. Anything. All right. Now, I had infrastructure as service. I told you the problem with infrastructure as service. And then we came to platform as a service offering. Right. So eventually you are being asked to write the code all the time. Right. But generally, you would find, situations where you don't want to write the code also, right? You don't want to write the code. Let's say, uh, you know, you wanted to invite people for a particular meeting, and for that meeting, you wanted to send them a mail, right? And schedule the meeting on, let's say, one of the platform like Zoom or anything. Now, ideally, 1 second, just a minute, guys. Yeah, ideally, let's say you don't want to write the code for it, right? Because these applications, these are ready to use applications, correct? These are ready to use applications. These are not the applications that you're going to you're going to create, right? So that is the problem with platform as a service offering also, that what if I do not want to do any development altogether? I don't want to do any kind of development. So what do I do in that case? I use ready to use softwares, correct? I use ready to use applications, and that is called as software as a service, where I don't want to write the code also. I don't want to manage the operating system. I don't want to manage the application. I don't want to write the code. I just want to deal with one thing, and that is the data itself, right? So on top of whatever was already captured or covered by Microsoft, now I have an hosted application which is hosted by the cloud service provider itself, and it's available to me over the browser, right? And while working with this application, I do not get to deal with anything, not the operating system, not the ability to install or uninstall anything, right? Nothing in my hand. Everything will be taken care of by Microsoft itself. All right. So this is your software as a service offering, which offers you ready to use applications. All right. So for example, if I want to conduct a meeting, then I can go ahead and conduct it on Teams, Meet, Zoom, anywhere. These are all software as a service offerings which are available. If I want to send a mail, I can send it through Gmail or I can send it through Outlook. Again, a ready to use software created for me. So these are all your SaaS applications. All right. And the best part is I don't have to worry about anything here. I just have to consume the resource. I just have to use the platform. Nothing. I don't have to develop the platform. I don't have to test the platform. Nothing is my headache here. All right.
Um,
So that is software as a service offering. Now we'll try to understand all these concepts with an example as well, right? And let's see. So how many of you love pizza? How many of you love eating pizza? Almost everybody? Yes. What are the different ways in which you make pizza? What all different ways are available? First, you have made at home, where from scratch you start making it at home, right? From scratch, everything, getting the raw materials, putting it all together, building the base, right? Creating all the sauces, right? Putting all the cheese on it, and then finally baking the pizza. Everything is in your hands. This is the make at home, where you make it end to end at home. The second way is where, let's say, some of these steps are taken care of by somebody else, right? First of all, if you try to make it at home, I think this is what most of us face. Is that correct or not? Yes, we try to make it, but we fail, but we try again, right? So we do not make it at home in that case, right? Instead, we do something called a steak and bake, where you take, a ready to eat or a ready to make pizza from the market. You bring it, you bake it, you eat it. All right. So here, all the ingredients such as cheese, topping, sauce, dough, everything will be taken care of the service provider itself, right? All you have to do is get the fire or the oven started, right, or the electric gas, whichever it is. Heat the pizza, eat it, get something to drink with it, let's say, some soda or something, and that is all. So that is take and bake. Another method is where, we go and search for a coupon and we get it ordered online. All right. You place an order for the pizza online where, everything will be taken care of by them itself. Now, baking is also not your headache. They will bake it for you. All you have to do is, once you're done eating at home, you need to clean the space, right? Along with that, you need to get something to drink with it. Drink pizza, along with the pizza. Then you have the last model, right? Where you don't want to make it at home, you don't want to do a take and bake, and you don't want to get it delivered also. What do? You go to the outlets itself and have the pizza there, right? Now, getting you soda is also their headache. Cleaning the tables, getting the tables ready for you to, come and sit and have it is also on them. The electricity, the gas, oven, fire, whatever you've decided to work with is also on them. The dough, the ingredients, the raw materials, it's all on them now. So, based on the previous discussions that we've had on the same topic, can you classify these four examples? Can anybody classify these four examples?
I notice SaaS, software as a service.
All right.
Made at
So,
home is infrastructure at a service as a
uh,
service.
all right. So, this is you're saying IaaS, right?
Yeah.
This is
Um,
SaaS. What else?
Take and bake is platform as a service.
All right.
We saw only
And
three, right?
what about delivery?
So, made at home is a private, is a on-prem.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. This is on-prem. Because the moment I say infrastructure as a service, there has to be something that the CSP takes care of. Yes. When you talk about infrastructure as a service or platform as a service or software as a service, one thing you have to always remember that the underlying hardware, some part of it will be taken care of by the cloud service provider itself. But here, when you look at made at home, nobody is taking care of anything. You are doing it end to end. And this is something that you have seen in the on-prem or the private cloud, where you build things from scratch end to end. That is the on-prem. The take and bake here, then what is take and bake? What do you think?
Infrastructure as a service.
Absolutely correct. This becomes infrastructure as service because some part of it is managed by the vendor itself. All right. Similar to how you have infrastructure as service in the cloud. Some part of it is managed by the vendor, by the cloud service provider. Microsoft will manage it. right? The hardwares, the data center building, everything will be taken care of by the Microsoft. Then you have pizza delivered. This become your platform as a service
Pass.
offering. And then finally,
Pass.
a place where you do not have to do anything. You just have to consume it. What is that?
Eat pizza.
Just eat it, just consume it. That is your software as a service offerings, right? So if you remember, we said, right, if you want to send a mail, I'm not going to create a mailing application to do that. I'll use a ready to use application such as Outlook or Gmail to send that mail. All right, I'm not going to create anything. I'll just consume the already existing resources. And that is your software as a service offering. So does it make sense now?
Yeah, we have an example like email, Gmail, for software as a service, right? Could
Yes.
you give an example for PaaS and infrastructure as a service in our IT side?
Virtual machine. I gave you the example in the beginning itself. A virtual machine is the biggest example or the best example for an infrastructure as a service offering. And I'm pretty sure you've not heard of, if even if you've not heard of virtual machine as of now, right? If you've not worked with them virtual machine as of now, in the next few classes, right? I think in the next class itself, we'll start with virtual machines and you'll have a complete understanding. You'll have a complete understanding of it.
I did hear of virtual machine, but what my understanding was let's say we join some company, we work, they allocate a virtual machine to us, right? So we connect to that, VPN or Citrix, and then we log on to
Yes,
that particular virtual machine
yes,
allocated to us, and we getting into that environment. Um,
yes,
uh, yeah, so that's the one, right?
yes, absolutely. That is the one. So that is where you get to manage the operating system also, right? When you're creating the virtual machine, you get to manage everything. You can, use that virtual machine for developmental work. You can create applications on that. You can write code. You can, store data. You can manage the data. Everything you can do within that virtual machine. That is infrastructure, giving you the entire infrastructure, whatever is on top of the hardware layer, right? So on top of the hardware layer, you have the software layer, right? And software layer will start from operating system, go to the applications, then the code, then the data and everything. And you get to manage everything on top of the hardware layer. All right. That is infrastructure as a service. When you come to platform as a service offering, we are mainly focused on creating environments where users can go ahead and do the development work. All right. For example, Azure App Service. App Service is a resource in Azure that lets you host web applications. If I want to host a web application on the cloud, right, I can use this service called App Service. What App Service will take is only my code, only the code and data that you have. It will not take anything apart from that. All right. So when you want to host applications on the cloud, you have to develop those applications. And when you're developing those applications, you generally do not get to manage the operating system as well. All right. You do not manage the operating system in those cases. All right. So app service, databases in Azure, storage account in Azure, all of them are examples of platform as a service offerings. Clear? Is this clear to everyone?
Yeah. So all these services which are available, we just call
Hmm.
them as resources and services. I
Yes,
thought
yes, yes.
all of them are software as a service, including Azure Data Lake,
No, 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 no,
virtual
no, no,
machine.
no, no.
Okay.
It's different. These are all generally platform as a service offerings. Software, see,
Okay.
wherever you have to configure, wherever you have to create, it can never be SaaS application. Wherever I have to create, it will never be a SaaS application because SaaS applications are ready to use. Then what is there to create then? Right? All right. So what we'll do, I'll quickly give you a walkthrough of the Azure portal where we are going to work with these resources and create these resources. And I'll simply show you how you create a virtual machine and how you connect to that virtual machine as well. All right. I'll just quickly demo that to you. All right. So this is what the Azure portal looks like. All right. This is where you're going to create all your Azure resources. All right. So it's portal.azure.com, and it will only work if you have a subscription, if you have a valid subscription. If you open portal.azure.com right now, you will not have a subscription for it, right? Generally, people will not have a subscription for it, right? So you need to have a subscription in order to work with the Azure platform. Now here, right, on the left hand side, you have all your favorite resources, whatever resources you marked as favorite. On this screen, what you see on the top are all the recently used resources. All right. So whatever resources you worked with recently will be available over here, right? Here you will have access to the subscription to something called as a resource group. Until now, we do not know what a resource group is. So don't worry. All right. We'll cover what it is. I just wanted to show you a demonstration of the portal itself. So resource group is basically a group that you create before creating resources. All right. So if I want to create a virtual machine, I'll first create a resource group, which is mandatory for any resource. If I want to create any resource in Azure, it needs to have a resource group. I cannot create any resource without a resource group. All right. So it's like a logical container of resources. Think of a resource group as a logical container of your resources. Then you have all the resources which are there and the dashboard also if you have any dashboard created, right? So we wanted to work with virtual machine. I wanted to create a and also let me show you what is here. On the top, you have a search bar where you can search for any resource. Right next to it, you have the Copilot access, right? Your AI assistant, which you can, basically ask questions to related to Azure or related to, let's say, if you're stuck somewhere and you need some support, you can always reach out to the Copilot window here and ask questions, give prompts. All right. You have here something called as Cloud Shell. All right. So if you want to use the command line interface on the browser itself, you can open this Cloud Shell. It will give you two options, PowerShell and Azure CLI. So you can do scripting work using Azure PowerShell and Azure CLI. But if you want to create a terminal on the cloud, you use this Azure PowerShell. So if I open PowerShell, let's wait. Oh, sorry, Cloud Shell. I said PowerShell, right? It's a Cloud Shell. So it will create a terminal on the cloud itself, on the browser itself. So not the cloud, but the browser itself. All right.
The difference, what is the difference between Cloud Shell and PowerShell?
Um, can you repeat your question? I think your voice is breaking.
I'm asking what is the difference between Cloud Shell and PowerShell?
Let me check my audio connection once. Let me increase my volume once.
It was breaking
Uh,
for us also. He is asking what is the difference between Cloud Shell and PowerShell.
all right. Okay. So asking the difference between Cloud Shell and PowerShell. See, Cloud Shell is a browser-based command line tool. All right. It is offered by Azure also. Cloud Shell is offered by AWS also. Google Cloud will also give you Cloud Shell. So it gives you a ready-to-use environment, right? With your cloud SDKs, tools, and storage. So you don't need to install anything on your computer. You run it directly on your browser, all right, through your cloud service provider. All right. So that will come with Bash, that is, your Linux shell or PowerShell pre-installed within the Azure Cloud Shell, for example. Right. So, and PowerShell, on the other hand, it's a command line shell and scripting language developed by Microsoft. All right. So Cloud Shell is a tool. PowerShell is the language. Understood? Similarly, CLI. CLI is also a command line. CLI stands for Azure Command Line Interface. That is also a language to write your scripts. All right. PowerShell is available on your local machines also, on your Windows machine. On your Linux machine also you can install it. On a Mac machine also you can install PowerShell. All right. It is powerful for automating your administrative tasks, Windows related tasks. It can help you manage very easily. All right. So Cloud Shell is the environment. PowerShell is a type of the shell you can use inside Cloud Shell. All right. Along with Azure CLI also. Then apart from Cloud Shell, here you have the notification section, right, where you can see all the notifications related to your Azure account, and I'll show it to you. When we create a virtual machine, you will see this notification sector over here, right? The section over here. It will keep on getting notifications. The moment you create the resource, it will get a notification. The moment you start the resource, it will get a notification. So whatever you do on the Azure platform, there's a notification that gets created for it. All right. Then you have the settings section here. You have the troubleshoot button here. You have the feedback button here, right? That you can use to give to Azure any feedback that you may have. Then you will see the credentials that you used to sign in along with the subscription that you're using. All right. So this is the email ID or the credential that I've used. And below the Azure demo environment is the subscription that I'm using, right? You can have multiple subscriptions. You can switch between multiple subscriptions also, right? A single user can be a part of multiple subscription. And that is something that we'll see in the next class also as to how different subscriptions are created. Why is there a need for different subscriptions, right? What are management groups? All of that we'll see. Now, if you look closely here, right, we had a task of creating a virtual machine. All right. Until now, we've not understood anything. We've not seen anything, right? How you work with Azure, what is the resource group, what is the subscription, nothing we've seen. I just wanted to give you a taste of the Azure platform as to what it will look like. How will you create a resource? So I'll click on this virtual machine here, or I can subsequently search for virtual machines here. All right. So I'll click on virtual machine. It will give you all the available virtual machines that you have as of now, right? So not going to edit or work with the existing one. I'll click on create a new Azure virtual machine. All right. So simply I'll select Azure virtual machine. Now, whenever I'm creating a resource, I need a subscription, right? Without subscription, I cannot do anything on the Azure platform. So I have to select a subscription that I want to use. Once I've selected the subscription, I need to select a resource group also. Very simple words. Resource group is like a logical container for resources. All right, nothing else. So I'll select the resource group here. I'll select the name for my virtual machine. Let's create a Windows VM. I'll call it a Windows VM here. Then every machine is created within a specific Azure region. All right, so Azure has multiple regions. In India also, Azure has 3 regions. Can anybody name which locations does Azure have these regions in? Do you know which all locations Azure will have these uh, regions in India? All right. So there are 3 regions in India. One is India South, that is in Chennai. One is India West, that is in Mumbai. And one is India Central, that is in Pune. All right. So there are 3 data centers, or sorry, 3 regions in India. All right. Similarly, I need to select the region where I want to create this resource. For me, it's East US. If I wanted to create this somewhere in India, right, I can scroll down. I'll find something in India. Maybe it's not available in my subscription, right? Yeah. So in my subscription, I do not have the policy to create resources in India, right? Because in India, resources are very expensive, to be very honest, right? So I'll go ahead and use the East US 2 region itself. Availability options we have not seen as of now. I'll just select no infrastructure redundancy is required. Infrastructure redundancy means that you're you're creating copies of your infrastructure, right? Redundancy means duplication, right? And infrastructure duplication means, are you willing to duplicate your resources in order to increase the availability? Remember, I had discussed availability with you, that the resource has to be always 24/7 up and running. So to increase the availability, you create copies of it, right? Because one instance of the resource may go down. One instance, a single instance of a resource may go down in any scenario, right? But if you have multiple copies, for all the copies to go down together, it's not possible, right? So basically, you are increasing the availability by creating copies. So I'll select no infrastructure redundancy required. It clearly says that I don't want any copy for my resource. I just need a single Windows virtual machine. Trust security type, we'll skip it as of now. The image, which image I want, whether I want a Windows machine or a Linux machine. You cannot create Mac OS machines on Azure or anywhere. All right, a virtual machine cannot have Mac operating system. It needs to have only Windows and Linux. So I'll select Windows Server Edition, the 2022 Data Center Edition. Then the architecture is 64, x64. Then the size, right? So I'll only explain you the things that you can understand. Once I've selected, I need a virtual machine in this particular region, right? And I've selected the availability option. I don't want any duplicates. I've selected the image also as to which, which specific Windows machine I want. Then I go ahead and select the size. So for me, by default, it is set to 4 virtual CPUs and 16 GB memory, that is 16 GB RAM. It will come up with some default storage also. And the cost is 11,660 rupees per month to create this resource. So I'll select this. Now, when you log into your Windows, right, you have a username and password when logging into Windows. So you have to select that uh, username and password. So I'll select Windows admin, Win admin, and password. I'll keep something, and I'll show you where you're going to use this password. All right. So password is set now. Inbound port rule. Don't try to think about it as of now. Licensing. Don't try to think about it. You attach disks to a virtual machine, right? So by default, there is a operating system disk attached of 127 GB, which is a premium SSD. I can make it a standard SSD also. There are different types of SSDs and hard disks available, right? With different types of redundancies. The locally redundant storage, which basically creates copies of your data within the same data center, and zone redundant storage, which basically creates copies of your data across different data centers, right? So I can select any one. Let it be standard SSD itself within the locally redundant storage, right? If I want to attach more disks to my virtual machine, I can attach it from here itself. Networking. So there is a virtual network that already exists. So my VM would be, allocated to that virtual network. This virtual network has to exist in the same region as your virtual machine. So if the virtual machine is in East US 2, the virtual network should also be there itself, right? So I'll select the network details, management, monitoring, advanced settings. I don't have to worry about them as of now. All I did was create a virtual machine, select a subscription, select a resource group, give my virtual machine a name, select a region or a place or a geographical location where my machine will be up and running, select any availability option, right? Availability option as in if I want to create copies of my virtual machine or not, right? I selected the image, what OS I want. I selected the size of the VM, what is the CPU and what is the memory and what is the storage that I want. And I set the username and password. That is all I have done while creating this virtual machine, right? We'll go to review and create. We'll run some validation on whatever details we put, right? Once the validation has passed, we can go ahead and create it. So it will initialize the deployment. It will take around 1 or 2 minutes. Almost 2 minutes it will take for the deployment to be succeeded. All right. So we'll just wait for 2 minutes for the deployment to complete and then we'll continue. All right. When you start deployment, right here, you will see different resources that get created. So when I create a virtual machine, just a single resource is not created. Several resources are created, peripheral resources. A virtual machine will need a public IP address. So that is created separately. A virtual machine will need a network interface card. So that is created separately. All right. There are something called as NSG rules that will also get created separately. This is your network interface card that got created, right? So when you create a virtual machine, several sub resources also get created, all right, which are essential to keep the virtual machine up and running. So my machine has now been created. I can go to the resource. It's running, right? It's running. Fine. So on this page, I see all the details about my virtual machine. The resource group it belongs to, the status of this machine, it is running right now, the location, the subscription details, the operating system which my machine has. It's a Windows Server Edition, Windows operating system, size of the VM, public IP address to connect to the virtual machine, right? All the details I have over here. Now, in order to connect to the virtual machine, I have two options. One, by clicking on this connect button here, right? You go to connect and you can download this RDP file and run it, right? You download the RDP file, one executable will download, right? So let me download and show it to you. Right? The moment I download it, this is Windows VM RDP gets created. So if I open it, you'll see something like this, right? I'll click on connect and it'll by default open the Win admin that I had created. Now all I have to give is the password. I'll put the password, I'll click on OK. Second. Once you click on OK after entering the password, you just click on yes here and the connection to your virtual machine will now start. Right? So this is the connection to the virtual machine that has opened up. All right. And in a few seconds, you will see your Windows virtual machine created up and running that you can work with. It's very simple, right? If you followed along, you wouldn't find any issues with creating a virtual machine on Azure. It's a very simple process. And so is managing the virtual machine, right? And you'll see so many, job openings and everything mentioning we need a candidate who can work with virtual machines, who can manage virtual machines, who can, work with virtual machines. It's very simple. You'll understand it, much better in the class where we go into the depth of it. We create a Linux machine also. We see how you work with the virtual machine, all of that. So I'll close this server manager. Now, here, what is this virtual machine an example of? Which cloud service model does it follow?
Infrastructure as a service.
Your voice is a bit low.
Infrastructure as a service.
Infrastructure as service offering, right? Who manages the operating system within infrastructure as service offering? Who manages the operating system?
Service provider.
The service
Provider.
provider. Operating system is managed by the service provider. Are you sure? In
Operating system is
infrastructure,
managed by us.
by us, right? We get control over the operating system. So I get to decide which operating system I want, right? On top of that, if I show you, if you search for any updates, right? Microsoft will not do the updates on its own. You have to, manually do the operating system updates. So if you check for updates, if updates are available, you'll see them here shortly, right? So you see, operating system update also you only have to do on your own. Microsoft will not take care of it. That means we are completely managing the operating system here. This virtual machine is created in the East US region, right? Somewhere in the East US region, within a particular data center, on some rack, on some server, this virtual machine is currently running. All right. Now, it's utilizing the network from the data center itself, the Azure data center. So if I show you the speed of the internet, right? So this is currently the speed within the data center that you get, all right, provided by the cloud service provider itself. It's not using my internet, it's using the data center's internet. Clear? Is this clear to everyone? Very simple explanation of how you create a virtual machine. Yes? All right. So what we'll do is we'll stop here for the day. All right. We've covered a lot of topics. And in the next class, we'll start from virtual machines. We'll have a deeper understanding of what virtual machines are, what other services on Azure are, right? We'll see how you manage virtual machine, how you work with virtual machine. And this is important, right? Uh, Ideally, creation of virtual machine is not something that you would study in a data engineering course. But then when you work with data factory and you have to create a self-hosted integration runtime, then you require a Windows virtual machine. How do you work with that in that case, right? So you should have an understanding of how to create resources, how Azure works, how do you create various resources on Azure. So that is why we are going to cover all of it. All right. So we started with a very basic question. What is cloud computing? We saw different cloud models, the public, private, and hybrid cloud. We saw the benefits of the cloud, and we saw the cloud services also. That is your infrastructure as service, platform as service, and software as service. Clear? So we'll stop here.
Sorry,
Yeah.
how knowing virtual machine is linked with the Azure Data Factory?
You will link the machine with the data factory. You will yourself link the machine through self-hosted integration runtime. If you see this machine that I have created here, the one that already existed, you saw when I created virtual machine, there was something called as an SHIR VM that is already created, right? I created this Windows VM. This SHIR VM is basically connected to data factory. So you connect it to the data factory. All right. If something is present in the on-premise environment, then you connect that on-premise environment to the data factory itself through self-hosted integration and that. All right. That is something which we'll cover in the data factory section itself. So as I said, we'll stop the class here, right? Uh, Please, those of you who have not registered for the course, please do register, right? Next week onwards, we'll have our regular sessions, right? Saturday and Sunday, same time, and we'll dive deeper into Azure and its features and services, right? We'll do all of that. So thank you everyone for joining in. Thanks a lot for being a part of this demo session that we had. For any information, for any support, for any help, you can reach out to the backend team, right? To the WhatsApp number that you would have received, and they will support you with everything that you need. And please do join the course. I expect to see everybody who's been a part of this particular demo session today to be present
Hi,
in
Shreyas. Hi,
the
Shreyas. I
next
have
class
one
that we have
question.
on Saturday. Yes, yes, yes. Go ahead.
Is there any coding required for this course?
No, coding is not required, but you should have, good understanding of SQL.
Okay, I'm a ETL developer, Informatica.
Yeah.
I have 5 years of experience. Is it okay for learn? Is there
Yeah,
any
yeah. See,
prerequisites?
if you've already worked with Informatica, you are already aware of ETL concepts. You are already aware of what data ingestion means, what data transformation means. All of that is
Mm,
already clear to you, right? Now you just need to learn it on Azure, how it works.
yes, correct.
So you'll understand it, in a very simple manner. It will be very simple for you to understand the different various concepts which are there. But as I said, coding is not required. SQL is something which I expect everybody to know and understand before they come to the class.
Okay.
All right.
Uh,
Yeah.
Shreya, on SQL, right? On database, but do we need to have any tool in our local system like Oracle or SQL server that
No,
we need to install?
not required. Not required. You can work with everything on the Azure platform itself.
Azure platform, right? On
Yeah.
the that RDB connections, our local system admin privilege we require to
Yes.
that. Okay,
So on the Azure platform also, you will have various privileges that you can give.
okay. No, you did that RDP connection, right? Before
Yes, yes.
creating
RDP, remote
this.
desktop protocol. Yes.
Yeah. So that we need our local system admin privilege kind of things.
Nothing is required.
Okay. It's everything is be doing on the server level, right?
Nothing. We will work with, the Azure portal itself. Once you are familiar with the portal itself, once you understand the flow of how the resource creation works, because see, the process of creating the resources almost similar for every resource. There's a certain set of questions they ask, such as subscription, resource group, the name, and everything. And then there are resource specific configurations that you have to do. When it's a virtual machine, you select a let's say the operating system, the size of the VM. If it's a data factory resource, you don't have to select anything. You just select the name of the resource, you give it a name, you select the region, you select the subscription, you select the resource group, and it's done, right? So the process is very simple. The process is also the same for all the resources. Obviously, the configurations for each resources is going to be different. But once you understand the logical understanding, once you have the logical understanding of how it works, right, then you can go ahead and use command line interface also to create resources on Azure. But the only thing is you should understand when I write a particular command, what will happen on Azure, right? And if I have worked on Azure, what all information do I need in order to create resources from other places other than the Azure platform that we are going to work with. So our course will focus mainly on this Azure portal. We'll be using this portal for creation of various resources. So you can see currently working with Synapse, Data Factory, Databricks, right? All of these resources we are working with.
Um,
So yeah,
would you be also helping us like for this much of data volume, this is the usual recommended you know, virtual machine configuration or any service configuration? Because I think in real time project, it's not us who is creating all these resources and services, right?
uh, you ideally it should be you working with these resources. But yes, I understand the point you're trying to make, that the resource will exist already and you will be working on it.
Admins will be creating for us for the developers.
Uh, See, we do not have when it comes to database service. I'm not saying database service. I'm saying database services such as you see Synapse, see Data Factory. So we do not have that categorization of admins versus developers versus something else, testers or anything. That is not there. A person who knows Synapse will be responsible to set up Synapse, to work with Synapse, to create the Synapse resource and everything. All right. As a data engineer, administration is also your headache for all these data based resources, and development is also your headache.
So
All
we
right.
should know for how much of data volume, what is the environment we are setting up.
Absolutely. See, when we work with Synapse, right? When you work with data warehousing techniques and all those things, there, based on the amount of data that you're going to process, we are going to see a lot of things. The cost effectiveness of the resources, what, let's say, different SKUs are available, right? So, which SKU you should choose, different compute combinations are available. So, what type of data, what combination you should select, all of that we'll see.
Also for the people who registered, you said you will be sharing the Python details. That would be
Yes,
helpful.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Yes, Sukanya, we'll share it with you.
thank you both.
All right, guys, please do register. Please come for the next session. I'll see you guys on next Saturday. If you have any doubts, you have the number, you have the details, you can reach out to the NIC Academy team, NICIT Academy team, and they will definitely help you out with any problems that you may be facing with the registration or any more doubts that you may have related to the course. All right.
Thank you.
So thank you everyone for joining in. Thank you for
Thank
giving
you,
me your
Shreyas.
time.